So welcome back to this first session of the afternoon, where we're going to rethink, revisit, rebuild our HTMs, and it's subtitled Co-Creating for a Better HTM. And I'm going to introduce in a moment this beautiful foursome that we have before us. Well, there's one of them that's really beautiful, but don't know about the other three, but there we go. But before we do that, we thought we'd ask you what you thought in terms of what's wrong with the current HTMs. And so hopefully, if you turn to your Mentimeter, you might be presented with a new question, with a series of choices that I've suggested you might look at. I haven't got my phone, so I don't know if it's up. Have you got questions on your Mentimeter about what's wrong with the current HTM? Oh, I can see now. So if you'd like to vote on some of your thoughts around HTMs, we would be grateful. That's your, those are the, oh right, that, I gave a series of questions as well on a previous one, so maybe my suggestions weren't good enough. No mention of automated manual pre-cleaning tiny air. No, they were not consensus developed with a structured development. Their inconsistency, I thought that was one of them as well. Lack of clarity. Okay. So I thought about inflexible. There's an inflexibility in there.
That's right with the HTM.
No account of new technology was something else I came up. Has that come up there? Vague. I like that. Okay, so we've had a few suggestions in there, so hopefully our panel are going to try and address some of that. Now, the rules for this engagement are obviously we're keen to get as much participation from the gathered brain power that's sitting in this room. There's a process that's already started in terms of the HTM development, but you will have much, as you've demonstrated, to say about all of this. So our panel members this afternoon, we've got John Prendergast, who's the Principal Decontamination Engineer working within Specialist Service Teams at NHS Wales. Jim Tinsdale, who you've met already, but is an independent AED running his own company and providing services to the NHS and others. Zoe Fayez-Rust is the Director of Science and Quality Assurance at IM Med. And Rob Wilberton is a Trust Decontamination Lead for Manchester University Hospitals, but also the current Institute of Decontamination Sciences. Now, each of these panel members has provided one slide, which they get 3 minutes to talk around. And we're going to take them in turns, and they're going to give us their view of where they think, from their personal point of view, they're coming from. Now, opinions expressed, this is a family gathering of members of a club. So any opinions they express or any opinions you express are your own opinions. They don't necessarily represent those of your employers or your businesses, etc. So nobody's going to hold you to any of this. This is a free-flowing discussion with that in mind, that these are our off-the-cuff thoughts as we go through this process this afternoon. So nobody is going to be held accountable for saying something here which later they might think, actually, I wasn't quite what I wanted to say. Let's have that free-thinking thoughts going through. So without further ado, John, we're going to bring up the slides, please, if we could. And we're going to start with John, I think.
3 minutes.
Okay, so I think we've talked about this a number of times here in various other conferences, IHEAM events, and the like. I think going back in time, HTM 2010, 2030, they were concise wordings, what a maintenance engineer was and a test person. I think in those documents it gave the potential background of that engineer, you know, whether it had been an apprenticeship, HNC, that type of thing. Those qualifications were in place. You look at the other engineering disciplines, which, you know, are all part of this HTM0 family tree. Make gases, HV, electricity, low V electricity, etc. There is defined positions for the competent person, the authorized person, The authorising engineer, no. I think we've got our guidance is quite concise on that, whereas the other ones are a little bit vague. Now, for us, when you look where we were 20 years ago, people came from industry, they were, they had a good background to them. They come into the healthcare sector, the private engineering sector. They were people who were qualified, they were, competent in mechanical, electrical disciplines, etc. We haven't got that now. The engineers that come in for competent persons, if we're lucky, you do get a good engineer, they have a good background, especially people coming out of the military, that type of thing. However, we do find a lot of people are coming in, probably because we haven't got the resources, are coming in with not the required backgrounds. When they do come in, a lot of the validation reports I see, you've got engineers that may have a training course in 2001, 1998. They've had no training since that period. How are they competent? Yeah, to work on medical grade equipment. Yeah, equipment that's related to the instruments we were talking about earlier. Yeah, it's critical to have competent engineers, routinely trained, knowing mechanical, electrical, software systems. Yeah, because a lot of our machinery is software based today. There are massive holes in the competent person. The authorised person. All too often, the authorised person isn't taken as seriously in decontamination as it is in medical gases. Yeah, you would not work on a terminal unit in a ward without the AP med gas signing a permit. How many of you in decontamination do you have the APs signing the permits? Yeah, some are very good examples, others the other end of the scale. So there needs to be in stone training of a number of years, yeah, a certain element of continual professional development in the field. Yeah, the authorised person should be going to be retrained at set intervals. Yeah, probably I would say.
It's funny how 3 minutes disappears.
I would say 5 years refresher training for both disciplines.
Thank you, John. Thank you for finishing quickly.
Thank you, Mike.
Jim, over to you for your slide. Can we have the Jim slide up, please? Which should be the next one down. There we go, Jim.
So, first one on there, I've got one specific and then some general. So, we should have prescriptive surrogate devices for testing of endoscopes. And why do I say that? Because they're very complex devices and we need to be assured that what we're doing to them, whether it be washing or drying, is actually working. And then the second one is, on that specific, is include, and this comes into all sorts of intellectual property thing, include the full test that's detailed in the standard within the HTM. And I say that because HTMs are freely available, all of the APs have got them, CPs access them, and so on. The same isn't true of the standards. Now, we might well think it should be, but I'm telling you in reality, that's not where they are. They aren't carrying the standard around with them. And then my second element is more general. So it's a process for dealing with discrepancies between standards and guidance, as in HTM guidance, because there are a number of discrepancies, and if you apply the ruling principle is finance, you get one answer, and if you apply the ruling principle being safety, you get a very different answer. So I think we need some process within there as to determine which route we take on that. And then a second element of process for new technologies and adopting of new technologies, and a slightly controversial one I've put in there of a route to automatic control tests so that they're electronically done. That's my view, slightly less than 3 minutes. I've rescued you, John. So those are my priorities for HTM.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jim. Then Zoe, we're going to bring your slide up as well, if we can, and let you have your 3 minutes too, if you wouldn't mind.
So when asked the question of what I'd like to change in the HTM, I found that quite a difficult concept to come up with because I'm quite detail orientated, and there's several sections, as I'm sure you've all kind of shared your opinions, that need refining. So I kind of took a step back and looked at the wider picture of it, and what was so frustrating, I'm sure lots of you were around with the last set of updates, and it didn't feel like the changes were managed. So my kind of request and input and opinion on it is that actually we need change management. We need change for a purpose. With that, a nice little feedback loop, thank you ChatGPT, at the centre being patient safety, but also operator safety. We can't obviously put them at risk, but we need to really think why it is we're making the changes, why we're doing what we're doing. And is that fit for purpose for obviously patient safety at the end of it? What I think we really need is collaboration, and having kind of meetings like this and discussions means that we get that. But the people on the working group for the changes need to be representative of everybody, not just one set group of people or industry like myself. It needs to be those on the shop floor, those are the kind of going to be handling these changes and what they need to do day to day. Because realistically, technology is moving quickly. We don't know what we don't know. So we need a really collaborative approach to really understand what we're doing and why. And then with that, during that change process, we need a lot of communication and transparency. And I think for me, a lot of what was missing and what we might find again on the shop floor, hard for them to then instill these changes and these good practices, is the justifications of why we do what we do. So why do we do what we do? And when we change, why are we making that change? Ultimately feeding back into patient safety. So I want better consultation and collaboration. I want clearer justifications of why we're doing what we're doing and the changes to what we're doing, ultimately so that in practice we get something that's really practical and ultimately for patient safety.
Thank you, Zoe. Rob, you've actually been given almost a whole minute extra now because of these two, and I know that's possibly going to be a great help from your point of view, because not a man to not share his opinions. So, Rob.
No, I'll try and keep it brief because I did try and condense this down when I was asked what we wanted to change, and like Zoe said, there's lots. Some of the main points I wanted to pick out was, firstly, a closer collaboration when we do the review with current diagnostic microbiologists. And what I mean by that is we've had for a long time the HTMs have been very, very focused on environmental microbiology. So we're all really focused on water. We're really geared around Pseudomonas and Pseudomonas type culturing, where doing that, we miss a whole plethora of organisms. And that plethora that we're missing is the ones that are causing us major problems within the healthcare organisations. This is all your health-acquired infections. So we need to include those type of microbiologists in the consultation process when we do the review, so that we start developing standards and tests and sampling protocols which will give us the answers and the information that we need to fight hospital-acquired infections. And that's what I mean by the first one. So the second one, greater detail on action and alert levels. I'm kind of looking at HTMO 106 for this one. When we compare the testing that we do on the actual product, not sort of the water test, not the environment, all the other tests that we have around the process, when we actually test the product, the patient-ready product, the endoscope, if we look at what we've got in that HTM in comparison to what we're using around the world, our guidance is really, really weak. It doesn't give us a whole load of named action or alert organisms. It doesn't really say the count. It just says if you find above 10 CFUs of anything, wash the scope again. That's it. Whereas if you go to somewhere like Australia, they've got a step-by-step process of these are your alert organisms, these are your action organisms. If you have this count, do this. If it persists, do that. And they go all the way back till they're returning that scope to the manufacturer for replacement. That's the type of detailed process that we need to have to ensure patient safety. And that's what we're missing in our HTMs at the moment. So that's what I mean by the second one, having a more detailed analysis of action alert levels. And uniformity across all nations, as we already mentioned, the process did start with NHS England with the review of the HTM to try and combine them, the four nations approach. However, the two chaps that were leading on that have now left the NHS England, and now we don't know where we're getting at the moment. But what that needs to be is a risk-based approach. And if I take you all the way back, like John touched on, for 2030, 2010, when we had them, the harmonised standards and the ISOs, they used to look and get the information from the HTMs. We were leading the way with those HTMs. Since then, there's been a switch, and now we're following. And I think we need to get back to leading the way with the HTMs being the pinnacle standard. And when I say risk-based approach, the reason I want to touch on the old ones was because one of the first emitters that we had in 2030, I think it was, when you had RO water and deionized water, they originally said that one was 30 microsiemens, another one was 40 microsiemens, and the question was, isn't the purity the purity? So just because the method of purifying the water is different, why should we have different levels of purity? So the risk-based approach is the standard is the standard, irrespective of the method, and that's what we need to do. So have that across all four nations. No one's doing anything different, because that's the standard, that's what it needs to be, and that's what everyone should follow.
Thank you, panel. Could they just have would you like to express your pleas? I thought you might not for a minute, and it was going to be a stunned silence. Right, we're now going to come to some questions from the floor, from all of you. So it's your chance to now come up with some questions. As you do, please can you hold the microphone towards your mouth? Otherwise, it will be missed.
This better? Is this good? All right. Hi, Lena Cordy-Bancroft, Medtronic, formerly BSI on the standard side, and curious about the HTMs, being the pinnacle and should be the one that we go to. I think that's well and good. However, industry and the standards world is trying to go to a harmonized, global alignment, and it be really good if we could get HTM, the NHS involvement in the standards writing process, so that there's alignment between the HTMs and what we're writing for industry and to meet the regulatory needs. Other areas are doing this probably better than we are doing in the NHS, but it was a big challenge while at BSI to get any contact or momentum with NHS, because we need the alignment between what the requirements are for industry from a regulatory requirement, and then what the NHS is doing. And that alignment is absolutely necessary, but we're not going to do it without alignment.
Yeah, please.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And we do have sort of that alignment. It's almost there. So you've got representatives like Richard from IHEM, who will be heavily involved. So IHEM will be heavily involved in the HTM review. You've got members from the IDSC who also sit on the Standards Committee, and Darren Carter. Again, these individuals, the IDSC as an organisation, will be involved in the HTM review. So you're right, we do need that alignment, but it's making sure that these lines are clear, so that the ISO committees also know who they've got, who's also going to be involved with writing or drafting or putting the information into the HTMs. So we are sort of there. There's the right personalities are in the right groups. It's just making sure that that's common knowledge to all parties.
Yes, go on, John.
Just coming on that, Lena, I think the one thing, and going back to what Rob highlighted in the previous HTMs, where they were descriptive, there was information there. One thing I was looking at last week, the English HTM, and I was looking at certain tests for, in this instance, it was sterilizer testing. And when we looked at it, we thought, well, what does the HTM say about the leak test? It just referred you to the standard. Now, the old HTMs weren't like that. I will add WHTM and SHTM are a little bit more descriptive, but the HTM, or the original HTM that came out in England, 2014, 15, whenever it was, lacks that description. It's all right, telling you to go to a BSEN ISO standard. Not everybody has the license to buy them, and they are very, very expensive as well. So to me, I think, yes, consider the standards, but our approved code of practice can be a good description of what the standards say.
Okay, there's another question there. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Richard Bancroft from Steris, also an AED and also very committed to standards development, as you may be aware. So a couple of comments. The first flippant comment is this ought to be a 5-day conference if we're going to start talking about what's wrong with the HTMs, because I think we all recognise, it's endless. But I think my first proper comment is that HTMs are UK guidance. Guidance meaning it's what you should do, not what you must do, as opposed to standards, which are still voluntary, but standards have a lot more impact in terms of conformity to them, as opposed to law, which of course you must comply to. So you've got that hierarchy of law, standards, guidance. And our guidance and the standards have been developing slowly but relentlessly and improving. Our HTMs haven't, and the HTMs need to catch up and be more aligned. But the key thing is that the standards, are consensus developed and good practice, and to Lena's point, globally developed. So they're a global way of doing the right thing. Our guidance document should be the UK implementation of those standards, and patently not. A lot of it's cyclic. It just says follow this, follow this, follow this, as opposed to giving an interpretation of the guidance, which we don't. My final comment, and then I'll be quiet, is that we need a structure to develop or revise the HTMs. And please, 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 not the bloody structure we've had before. 2 weeks before Christmas, get your comments in, closed door, we'll tell you, no, we won't, what was accepted, what wasn't, and wait for the new version coming out. There's got to be a way of doing this. And unfortunately, unpalatably, it's not quick. And what it means is there needs to be time for good consultation, good comments, and a formal way of resolving those comments in exactly the same way that we develop standards. I'm not suggesting that we should be necessarily doing this under a BSI, structure, but we need a common approach where I think, Mike, you said at the beginning that there's a lot of knowledge in this room. Well, let's use that knowledge in the room appropriately.
If I having the transparency as well, like you've said.
Hang on. No, chair's prerogative now. Hold on a second. In the pre-discussion for this conference, Richard and everybody else in the room, I bandied around a suggestion to the committee that said, would the JCVI approach offer a model that we could adopt, or that the UK could adopt, for management of the change? Because as you're just beginning to highlight, there is this constant need to keep, and you've been talking about the constant need to be up to date, responding to what's happening. The next blooming robot has turned up on the scene and caused the next headache. Now, the JCVI approach, Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, is a UK statutory committee that reports to all 4 governments, or 3.5 governments, whatever they are, sorry, Ireland, and has a secretariat that is responsible for those ongoing discussions. The committee are elected effectively through a proper process and then assign that position by ministers and report to all ministers of all 4 nations. Now, that approach would potentially work with a scenario like this. How would we get to somewhere like that? What are we going to do about these problems? Sorry, Rob, you can now come in.
You were going to answer that one.
It's probably out of our political hands, Mike, isn't it? But I think...
I would say, John, before you say that, unless we start having these conversations, people won't know we're thinking this way. Or is my thinking totally wrong?
I think the difficulty you have, obviously, I brought in the other engineering, ventilation, medical gases, etc. Whichever HTM route we go down, we have to be consistent with those documents. Decontamination is not a topic in isolation. It should be the same. So whoever the ownership routes are, it has to be the same as those, because they are intermingled to a certain degree. Decontamination is such a wide topic. We've got microbiology, we've got engineering, we've got chemistry, we've got water, yeah? So it does cross-pollinate with a lot of these other areas. You know, we think of, say, the endoscopy 0106. There is a section in there about designing an endoscopy unit, which does include ventilation, water services, air services, the whole match.
It'll include electrical. Sometimes you'll have
Exactly.
med gases.
So
if you're using
wherever the
that for the
ownership
drying
route
as well.
is, it has to be in alignment with those. But that's not saying that we can't be a little bit more flexible. And I do accept, you know, Richard's made good points about consultation. Whichever route we go, we have got to be able to perhaps react quicker.
You're not going to bring people along on change if you're not bringing them along on the journey.
Totally agree, so.
And there's a whole room of people that have voiced concerns
Totally
about the
agree.
last lot, and it's there's so many books on change management.
Yeah.
It's a hard concept to get around, but I think we've got people willing to do it. So bring them along on the journey, and I think it's transparency, it's accountability. Like, who's involved in those discussions and can they present reports on it? You can have change ambassadors throughout industry that are going to field questions of, if we propose this, if we do that, how is that going to impact on your department? It's open forums where people can be invited to then hear about the updates. It doesn't have to be perfect. We need to be agile because technology moves on and things change. New infections come out.
Now, I know Jim wants to come in, but Brian, you also wanted to make a point.
I was listening to what Richard was saying, and I agree with everything except for one thing, and I believe BSI should take these over. They have a well-established method for developing new documents, for continually revising them on a periodic basis and publishing them. And okay, we talked about the cost, but I'm sure that can be managed through appropriate government grants. I do not agree with giving the government anything, because when reform get in, they'll scrap it all. Big extreme in view, but
I can't believe you went there today.
the problem is these government agencies, as we've seen, are transient, and so you get a nice body of experts within that group, and then they're disbanded. The expertise is in this room. Everybody in this room can belong to a BSI committee and contribute to the development and update of standards, and there's no reason why an HTM cannot be drafted in the form of a British standard.
Boy, of the two AEDs nearly agreeing.
And that means hell's freezing over now. You know.
Question over there. Jim, come back in, and then we'll go to the question over there.
So quick one on that. Are we talking about one HTM for the nations, or are we talking about one slightly altered for each of the nations? Yeah, I get that, but I'm just asking.
I think one of the problem is I think most people, I suspect, would prefer just one.
Yeah.
But because of the way governments behave, I think that's why we haven't got one. What was the question?
The question was just simple, isn't it? Because decontamination hasn't got one voice. We have CSC, we have IDSC, we have MPAG, we have, and it goes on and on. And we haven't got one voice. So to get an opinion is difficult.
Which is why I would go back to the JCVI model. There are multiple opinions being expressed in those committees from academia, from practical on-the-ground work all over the place, including government engagement. And through all of that, since 1963, they've been able to continue through a process. And I like what Brian was saying about somebody else owning it. Currently, of course, the problem with JCVI is it is owned by different government departments. Currently, I think UXA are responsible for the secretariat of that group, and it would be subject to some of the vagaries that that Brian was potentially hinting at. You want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm glad that Brian said that, because I was sitting here disagreeing with that one point that Richard made as well. I think, and the process that, that from the standards perspective is it's consensus building. So it's not one voice, it would be 4 voices coming in, with all, 3.5, however many it is. But, bringing them in and having these discussions along with industry and getting this common voice, so that there's commonalities between the practices going on into the HTMs that the NHS is following, as well as alignment with what manufacturers are doing, so that there isn't the disparities. But also then you've got potentially this opportunity to start getting some alignment globally, because the standards from a BSI level feed into the international. So I think that's, and keeping up with that state of the art concept.
Okay, anybody want to come back from the, yes?
So I'm just going to try and do a bit of a round robin there. So to touch on Richard's points, or Lena's, we can still use the HTMs in conjunction with the ISOs, and saying that it's a guidance, then shouldn't that guidance be best practice? So the ISOs can be drawn from what is the absolute best practice and whether we choose to or not. Stuart, you touched on about all the different factions that we have within the industry. Again, this is why bringing spokespeople from all of those factions together to sit on a central committee would be good, and that would lead into what Brian said, is maybe taking that out of the Department of Health hands, because the whole reason that the current HTM review has been put on hold is because of the government decisions about NHS England. So that's why we're in the position of flux that we're in now, else we would have been 6 months into the review now. And that's the other thing about the transparency that we touched on. How many people in the room knew that we were actually going to do a HTM review if the people that were on the panel hadn't have shared that with members and colleagues? Because I don't think it was well publicised. Nobody really knew about it. No, did you? No? Yeah. So there was a few of us that were involved in that process that were actually informed. It wasn't a transparent process, which, like we're saying, if it was with BSI, we'd have proper communication, proper publication, and we'd be able to tell people and get the various factions together, and we could do it that way.
Now, I don't know if I'm missing any opinions. From the back of the room. Okay, John.
Yeah, I was just summarising a little bit. So I guess my thought is, and I'm thinking about how we're actually going to do something rather than talk about it, actually get execution. So we talk about change management. So I think for me, my thought is what's actually going to happen at the end of this. So number one, I think we need a structure to progress. And Richard, he's been one of the stars of the UK in setting up the ISO standards. He knows how to make documents create. And I think we should use Richard because his expertise, and Brian as well, their expertise in creating these documents is second to none. The second thing which they talked about is this has to be guidance, not a standard. Standards are huge long lists of things to do, and they're huge long lists. I mean, I know ISO 1135, which I know 134 pages. We're not creating 134 pages of da, 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 da. We want to have simple, basic guidance. You should do this. This is why you should do it. This is a reason for it, which standards don't give you the reason. They just tell you what to do. They don't tell you why you should do it. They just say, do this. We should say, this is a problem. This is why we think you should do this. And this is what you should do to solve the problem. The third thing is it should introduce modern technology. If we're going to be leading, we have to adopt all the new technologies that are out there. There's lots of technologies, qPCR, even MoldIt off, all these things. We should be thinking about them and bringing them into the standard. And then the fourth thing is, how do we use technology to create a structure? And maybe we can do something like a Wikipedia type osmosis creation of a document where everyone can input and can write it. And I think maybe that's something. And as John will know, I'm not one as a treasurer to spend a lot of CSE money, but maybe we can invest a little bit in of our small reserves into helping get that technology going, so that people can input it and it's open to everyone. It's an open AI type solution.
Does anybody other than Rob want to respond from the panel? Go on then, John, first.
Well, do you want to go quickly, Rob?
Well, I just want to touch on, we're saying about one HTM. I want to know who put that down. Were we talking about one HTM for all of decontamination? or we're talking about one HTM for the four nations. That's what I wanted to nail down, because we including 04, 05, 01 and 06.
So the original ones that were discussed was 0101 and 0106. Where 0105? 0105 is a... Mike will tell you, we've had a few issues with that ourselves, never mind. I think, look, we've produced good documents over the years. There are people in this room, Brian, would remember HTM 10. I mean, it was a great, for those of you, it was quite basic and simplistic for sterilizer testing back in the day, but there was descriptions there for the whole part of the process. So we've got the, we have done it before. I know the science has expanded a little, but we can do it. I think the issue we have, and I think Jonathan touched on it, we do evolve, don't we? We think, things like data loggers, shall they replace the ACT, pre-cleaners for endoscopy? There's so many things have developed over the past 3 or 4 years, but how do we keep that guidance up to date is a bit of a challenge. And I think we can produce a piece of, suite of documents quite quickly, but it's whether we keep them in date. That's probably our biggest challenge.
Yeah, and that...
It's like we had with Ninhydrin. Before, Ninhydrin was like the test to do. And then it's like, well, it's not really accurate. And then we found more accurate ones. Standards developed, or guidance developed. So it is having that review to be able to go, right, this new technology is out. How do we incorporate that into the new guidance?
But surely you can also, without specifying certain technologies and methods, you can say it has a minimum like efficacy or limit of detection. There are concepts in accuracy that you can then specify for a technology or a method. It needs to be validated.
Jim?
Yeah, this was linking to the bit where I was saying we need some kind of process for adopting new technologies. So if we take the endoscopy pre-cleaners, then we need a surrogate that reflects. On my soapbox again. We need a surrogate that reflects an endoscope. We need some test soils, etc., to prove that it's doing what's claimed. But we just need the process so that we can go through it and not adopt stuff based on a scientific paper that may or may not have been challenged appropriately and a lot of sales pitch. We just need to be sure that it's going to do what we believe it's going to do.
Now we're running out of time, but I saw Jincy grab the microphone, so I'll give you a chance, and then I'm going
Just
to
a quick
ask for
one.
my Mentimeters at the end, and then let the panel go. But Jincy.
I hear loads of problem in the HTM standard, but also hear the knowledge is in the room, experience in the room, and solution in the room. Then I'm recommending CSC to hold another event like this, but it is just going to be an accelerated design event. So probably you have more experience with doing those kind of things in the quality and change management process. That process will help you to bring all the problems and solution together just within one day. You could actually do a document redesign that you couldn't do for years. So that probably is something that CSC could take a step ahead in organizing another day with key people within the room, with using utilizing every knowledge within the room.
Can we charge them for the honour, Jincy?
But it is true, like if you take the principles of like 13485, within 13485, there are multiple clauses that talk about how you do change management for a medical device. And we're ultimately dealing with medical devices and patients here. So why aren't we taking some of those concepts that it is, you have to look at the risk, you have to verify it, you have to plan it, and transition timeframes perhaps. The guidance needs to be a little bit simpler, but simple change control. It's propose the change. Why do you want the change? What are we going to do about the change? What are the risks of doing the change, or what are the risks of not doing the change? And then how do we implement that change? Yeah, that could be fielded from a whole group of people.
So can we bring up my first Mentimeter question of the afternoon? Well, there's the other one, the next one up, which is about, because when I thought about this, I wondered whether web-based publishing offered an not that one. That was the one I had originally. So we can move on. Yeah, would web-based publishing offer an answer? So if you'd like to go to Mentimeter, Jonathan talked about this because he suggested the option of a Wikipedia approach where everybody throws in and starts editing their favourite bit of the thing. I was minded that it was more on the basis of a much more controlled approach. So once you arrive at a new set of HTMs as a result of wherever we're at now, the place to publish them, if you follow the JCVI model, who publish the immunization green book, they stopped publishing it on paper years ago, I think in the early 2000s, and now each chapter is kept up to date as JCVI comes in opinion. So as new things come along, I think you like my idea, 30 versus 4 saying a web-based publishing offers an answer. Okay, we can move on to the next question, which is where you can therefore now throw in your opinions. Who should own and manage that resource? Who's the organization, or is there an organization which can independently own that resource? Oh, I never thought the Engineering Council. That's interesting. Yeah, well, I'm sure you're going to say third party like BSI because it was suggested earlier. Any other suggestions? Agree BSI. England. Who in England, then, if I would throw back at you, who in England is the one to, not DOH or not government? Okay, if it's not them, who? It can't. CSC would feel challenged, I think, to take this on. We are a tiny little organisation, and it would be extremely difficult to do that. But there's other names being thrown in. You'd like IDSC thrown into the ring. He can't type because he's up there. But we'll, anyway. Is there any one organisation, or should it be an independent body that picks up on this? Should we be making a play for a statutory committee of government being appointed, rather like JCVI? Should there be a joint committee on decontamination on a UK level, at a UK level, which serves all 4 nations?
I mean, that is the desire of the IDSC. That's the position they're moving themselves into. They've just been moved on to being the Professional Bodies Council. So they are now the only UK, Rob should. So they're now the only UK professional body for decontamination that's recognised on the Professional Bodies Council. And the desire is to move in that direction so it becomes a decontamination regulatory organisation.
Okay. Panel, any final thoughts? Because we're really running out of time now. We did start slightly late, so I've allowed us to go on a little bit. Any final thoughts before we allow you to take your leave? Nope. Well, thank you for engaging. Thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you, panel, and thank you, audience, for that. Would you like to thank them?